So you've created a great narrative hook and an ordinary world scene for your story, and you're thinking, what next? In this episode, I will share with you the important elements of the next plot point of the first act of your story. The next plot point in the first act is the inciting incident. The inciting incident is that scene that many first-time writers seem to confuse or entirely overlook. Most often this scene is confused with the hook or the first plot point. Today I want to take the time to point out the important elements of the inciting incident. This is the third installment of my 3-act structure mini-series. If you've just joined me on this episode, then I will link the previous 3 episodes, the hook, the ordinary world, and the episode on the 3-act structure in the show notes over on my blog. You can find the show notes at ameliahay.com/inciting-incidents. I've decided against unpacking the key scenes in Sanctus due to the story's length and complexity. The story has a ton of setup and a huge cast of characters, and I now realize the story isn't a great choice when explaining 3-act structure. Instead, I'll share examples from literature and film. So let's get started. In a nutshell, the inciting incident must appear in the first act of the story. It's between 10 to 15% of the way through the novel. This isn't set in stone, but it must appear around this time because you need to establish the ordinary world and set it up for disruption. So everything between the ordinary world and the inciting incident is story setup. An inciting incident is a metaphorical bridge between the ordinary world and the core conflict of your novel. Without this bridge, the story wouldn't make sense. This plot point changes the status quo of your protagonist's ordinary world and forces the unwilling character to take steps towards the core conflict of your story. So what should you include in a great inciting incident scene? There are 5 things you need to do in the inciting incident. I know this sounds like a lot of things to think about as you write or outline, but I wanted to break down the elements so it's easy for you to follow. Point number 1 is a problem and an opportunity to act. The inciting incident is set in motion by an event such as a text message or a phone call or an unexpected visit or a false arrest. This trigger event needs to be strong enough to force the protagonist to act and take a risk. The protagonist needs to go from passive to reactive. The easiest way to do this is to present them with a choice and little time to decide. A choice that will cost your protagonist no matter which option they pick. It's important you show the reason your protagonist chooses the option. The choice presented to the protagonist by the inciting incident must appeal to something within them to make their reaction believable. Point number 2 is by choice or by force. The protagonist has a part to play in the inciting incident. They made a decision that put them in the right place at the right time, but the consequences of these actions are often unintentional. We've all been in these situations that are beyond our control. The same needs to be true of your protagonist. So your protagonist might go to a specific location, but the problem should find them. An example of this is your main character is traveling home and they witness a murder. They're dragged into the police station for questioning. It turns out that your protagonist is the only witness and now the only suspect. The protagonist now has an invested interest to solve a murder. Number 3, it triggers an emotional response for the protagonist. The inciting incident should cause your protagonist to react instead of act. When someone reacts, they do so out of emotion and not out of a rational place. By reacting out of emotion, the protagonist takes a risk. This is something we can all relate to, and so can your reader. These emotional reactions are revealing. The protagonist's reaction in a crisis shows personality. It also exposes their values, goals, strengths, and weaknesses. As you write this plot point, consider what you want to reveal about the protagonist and choose the personality trait first, then consider the type of event that would reveal this. If you're stuck creating a moment to bring out these revelations, here are a few examples to consider. The death of a loved one, being framed for a murder you did not commit, getting fired from a job when you have a huge amount of debt piling up around you, catching a partner cheating, a loved one goes missing but no one takes your claims seriously, an orphan seeks the truth about their past only to have the answers ripped away at the last minute. Number 4, set in motion by the antagonist. The actions of the antagonist cause a problem faced by the protagonist in the inciting incident. These actions are deliberate, there's no room for accidents here. The antagonist has a plan and sets it in motion. In the process of this plan, the actions affect the life of your main character. At this point, the protagonist is unaware of the villain or the plans they have set in motion. All your main character knows is they have pain in their life and they want a quick fix. This is the only point in the novel where you can have a passive protagonist reacting. After this point, the protagonist needs to act and decide, not react. Number 5, it triggers your story into motion. The inciting incident needs to be a point in which the rest of your story evolves. You need to look back at this point in your story and see how it changed the course of the protagonist's life, and without it, the story would not be the same. This trigger moment hurdles your protagonist towards a point of no return, or the first plot point at the close of Act 1 through a series of events and choices. It's almost like a series of dominoes. The first one falls over and triggers the next, and so on. It creates a logical flow for your story. Here is an example of the inciting incident from the Hunger Games. In the Hunger Games, the inciting incident occurs when Prim is chosen for the games and her sister Katniss volunteers to take her place. Katniss and Prim are at an age where they must attend the reaping organised by the government of Panem. There is no choice. They must be at the reaping ceremony. As Prim is chosen, Katniss makes a last-minute decision fueled by her need to protect her mother and sister. We know that Katniss's mother has been through a considerable amount of loss up to this point. The government created the reaping and the games to prevent another uprising, which reveals later that President Snow is the antagonist and orchestrator of the games. Without Katniss's choice, the plot in the entire trilogy and the first book would never be set in motion. For those of you who want to dig a little deeper into writing a great inciting incident, then I recommend reading Write Great Fiction, Plot and Structure, Techniques and Exercises for Crafting and Plot That Grips Readers from Start to Finish by James Scott Bell. I recommend reading Chapter 2 on page 22 of the paperback. The chapter focuses on story structure. Bell renames the plot points used by the traditional 3-act structure, but he does this to help you understand what the terms mean. I really love this book because it's easy to understand and it doesn't make story structure complicated like so many other writing craft books. The inciting incident disrupts the ordinary world of your protagonist. It presents a problem and an opportunity to act. A choice the protagonist makes places them at the right place and brings the problem to their world. The problem triggers an emotional response. This emotional response leads to an impulsive decision, but the protagonist doesn't realize that the antagonist has set a plan in motion that created the problem. This plan also creates a series of events that unfolds in your story. Before you dive into writing your novel, I want you to consider the inciting incident of your favourite book. What can you learn from this? And how can you apply these learnings to your story? As always, I have an important question to ask you. Are you writing your first novel? Or are you writing the inciting incident of your story? Which tip did you find most helpful? Let me know by coming over to the blog post or the YouTube video and sharing in the comments section. If you love this video, then give it a thumbs up. If you're new to this channel and want to be notified about more videos just like this, then click the red subscribe button below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode of the Indie Authorpreneur podcast, where I will discuss the point of no return scene.